Rafael Camara's exceptional rookie season may have had the most time in the spotlight, but the 2025 Formula 3 season featured over 30 of the world's best up-and-coming racing drivers, and every single one of them has had a story to tell. Hello and welcome, fellow motorsports fans. It may be a bit late, but it is finally time for my season review of this rather exciting year of F3 racing. A new team, a new chassis, and plenty of new faces, brilliant rookies and fallen greats. This year really had it all. I'll walk you through every single one of the teams and drivers over the course of the next 15 minutes to ensure that none of them go entirely unnoticed. As is tradition, we'll begin with the lowest scoring team. Dams has replaced Genter going into the 2025 season, and unfortunately it has not worked out well for the French team in their debut season. They did have some good firepower on paper, with Eurocup 3 champion Christian Ho leading the way, but rarely looked competitive as a squad. Debut aside, usually when the car was competitive, Ho did manage to score, with only Monza as a notable exception. Thus, he was pretty comfortably the best performer in his team, both in the standings and on the road, something we saw coming before the season anyway, given he was supposed to be the biggest talent of the squad. In my opinion, Ho is one of the most overlooked drivers on the grid, so I am very much looking forward to see what he can do in better machinery. Peruvian Matías Agazeta was the more consistent teammate, but lacked the pace to really impress for a returning driver, but not fully backmarking either, just a bit forgettable all around if I'm honest. Alpine Junior Nicola Lacorte, I still don't know how the fuck he is affiliated with an F1 team, has been the most curious case of the bunch really. He arguably took to the car quicker than Ho and did have some impressive moments early in the year, but also proved to be a proper menace on track and rightfully earned himself a race ban. In that sense, I'll admit he outperformed expectations in both the good and the bad sense. AIX was the exact same mess we all kinda expected, with a driver lineup of both dubious quality and a lack of stability on top. On the bright side, the car was actually fast in the hands of Freddie Slater, Nikita Bedrin and Brad Benavides. Slater's debut and Benavides' pole position were surely the sporting highlight for the team. Then again, we know that Slater is a superstar in the making. You can refer to about half of my videos for further evidence. Bedrin is a bit of a super sub on this level, and Benavides was the oldest guy on the grid. I didn't expect anything of the only full season driver, Nicola Marangialli, and yet he managed to disappoint. Both slow and error prone, the spicy combination that probably made him the worst driver on the grid if I'm honest. Not much to say about the seat split between Javier Segura, James Hadley, Jose Garfias and Fernando Barrichello. Not a terrible set of drivers on paper, at least both Segura and Hadley do have some good qualities, and yet none of them ever managed to impress in any way, shape or form. The team does remain a bit of a mystery, but at least it showed the world how incredible fast Freddie Slater is going to be next year, I guess. Seeing Hitech this slow down the team's championship is quite sad if I'm honest. Sure, the lineup wasn't great, even on paper, but at least a lot of people had rightfully hoped to see McLaren Junior Martinez Stenson in the title fight, but it never looked like the team would be up to that task. At least Stenson did still get his fair share of good races, clearly dominated his teammates and even got 2 wins to his name. A P5 in the championship certainly isn't a hit to his CV under these circumstances either. Joshua Dirksen was a bit of a question mark heading into the season, and while he had seemingly improved his pace, he also managed to cause a fair few unnecessary incidents before running out of budget. Maybe the repair bill got a bit too high. Unfortunately, the team did not find a consistent replacement, with Jesse Carrasquedo, Nikita Johnson and Freddie Slater sharing the cockpit for the remainder of the year. We can ignore the single race Slater did and 2 anonymous performances from Carrasquedo, but I have to mention Johnson's lack of, well, really anything impressive. As you may know, I do rate Johnson rather highly and was really looking forward to his European campaign this year, but between an underwhelming GB3 season and his forgettable stint in F3, I do have to admit he hasn't been looking great this year. The last seat was unfortunately occupied by Gerard G instead of his substantially better former GB3 teammate Tim Mikoarczyk, and it was about as forgettable as expected, I'm afraid. She is a decent driver, but on a grid this stacked, he was always going to get smoked, and that's pretty much exactly what happened. The Italian Kingmaker outfit Prema has to be the disappointment of the year on the team's front. From smashing the team's title to P7 overall, the switch to the 2025 chassis was about as catastrophic as a swap to the 2024 chassis in F2. At least there was light at the end of the tunnel as they found some good form in the last couple of rounds, giving McLaren Jr. Ugochukwu the opportunity to show what he is capable of. The American youngsters started to really impress, particularly when talking about raw speed, even if there still were a few mistakes creeping in. Overall, I'd say Ugochukwu performed according to expectations given the circumstances and will surely be one of the big title contenders next season. In some way, the inter-team battle disappointed as much as the team itself though. This was supposed to be super closely matched, but in reality both Brando Badoer and Noel Leon shit the bed with only brief glimpses of hope. Badoer in particular started so poorly, he was a true contender for worst driver on the grid if you can believe that. And while Leon wasn't quite this bad, he couldn't have been much further from the title contender we were expecting. And honestly, he doesn't really have a good excuse to be smashed by Ugochukwu like that either. Considering he was a Rookie of the Year contender last season and a dark horse for the title in 2025, this was unfortunately rather disappointing. At least for those fans disappointed by Badoer, I can reassure you that he did look significantly better previously in his career, and I think he might do well with a switch to a different team. My working theory is that the combination of being a proper McLaren Jr. and a Prema driver might have been a little too much pressure, though that is of course purely speculation. Rodin was a weird team this season, and I'm still not fully sure what to make of any of that. On the one hand, it featured one of the most underwhelming hyped up rookie drivers in Louis Sharp. The Kiwi unfortunately never really seemed to find his feet to string together a proper weekend, even if the pace itself wasn't bad. Definitely not what we expected from the man some of you guys in the comments started comparing to Fast Freddy S. And on the other hand, we had Callum Voisin coming into this year as a bit of an outside title contender who fell absolutely flat after a decent start to the year. And those two things combined would make me believe that the team just wasn't doing great if it wasn't for Roman Bielinski. The Pole not only ended up as the most consistent point scorer of the squad, but even scored a surprising race win in Monza to cement his victory over his teammates. Now, Bielinski was rated reasonably highly coming into the season following his good 2024, but I think few people would have expected him to actually beat both of his teammates. Quietly one of the most impressive seasons on the grid in my opinion, and certainly one of the least expected ones. But this is a good one for a discussion in the comments. What do you make of this mess of a Rodin campaign? Let us know down below. Van Amersfoort Racing came in with a lineup headed by veteran Santiago Ramos and rookies Theo Final and Ivan Dominguez, and honestly, this inter-team battle was among the most predictable ones. Ramos had the upper hand early on, but Niel quickly began shining with raw pace when everything fell into place for him on any given weekend. The Frenchman is another contender for most overlooked driver by the average fan, I reckon, definitely expecting him in a title fight next year. And he did manage to keep his best qualities from lower categories. Guy was a lock to pull off a tricky overtake if he had to. Always appreciated his ability to make up positions no matter how stacked the grid. Funnily enough, Niel is the only one of the trio without a win, as even Dominguez has managed a bit of a random sprint victory. I will say though that the Portuguese driver was a bit forgettable aside from that. I reckon he is solid enough in F3, but I think he'll struggle to impact the top end of the grid next year as well. Ramos' early exit can only point to a lack of budget, and while I think the Mexican has shown himself to be a rather capable pair of hands, I don't think an F2 campaign would have really gone anywhere anyway. He should be a wicked addition to any sports car team out there though. Much like Prema, ART is a contender for most disappointing team when compared to expectations. Yeah, sure, somehow they still find themselves in P4 overall, which speaks more to the quality of the driver lineup, but this has still been nothing but shameful if you ask me. Particularly, leaving Ferrari Jr. Tuukka Taponen hanging like that has to be a crime. I firmly expected Taponen to be one of the key challenges to Camara, and instead he spent half the year struggling to score points. Taponen sneaking into the top 10 at all, beating the likes of Giusti and Belinsky, says a lot about the talent of the man they call the Tiger, but I can't help but feel like this year has set him back considerably in his quest to earn an F1 seat he is directly fighting Camara for. Teammate Lawrence van Eupen did admittedly beat Taponen a few more times than I expected, but we know the Dutchman is a solid asset for any team to have. Given the car performance, I'd argue he did about as expected. Nothing too flashy, but he'll get the job done. James Wharton unfortunately has to be considered the disappointment of the squad, despite ironically being the only driver with a win. He started the year both slow and a bit crashy, and only really sorted out the crashy half of that statement, aside from a few notable one-off performances. After a year of newly found form in Fracka last year, I had expected a bit more from the Aussie, but he is the kind of character I'd expect to come back much stronger next season. Either way, I sincerely hope this season does not impact Taponen's career in any way, shape or form. MP Motorsport really were the surprise contenders at the top in many ways, taking the sort of position we'd normally expect from the likes of Prema or ART. German Red Bull junior Tim Tramnitz was of course the highest ranked returning driver from last season and did do that experience justice in my opinion, as he arguably looked like the most well-rounded driver on the grid, aside from a stupid incident in Barcelona that is. Overall, I was very impressed with his consistent performance, particularly the regularity with which he charged up the order in the races following the rather mediocre qualifying performance from the team. I still don't know if he has the sort of flash you'd expect from an F1 prospect, but Tim Tramnitz has been the reliable workhorse of feeder series racing ever since his Fracka days and will presumably continue to do so in F2. Basically, he had a rather Luke Browning-esque season when compared to last year. Meanwhile, the battle between his two teammates was expected to be close-ish, but ended up a complete stomp by Williams junior Alessandro Giusti over Eurocup 3 graduate Bruno Del Pino. The Spaniard really struggled to string together weekends, with particularly notable issues in qualifying, suffering significantly more than his teammates and lacking the racecraft to make up for it later on. Then again, he might not have the highest skill ceiling in the world, but I still reckon he has a lot more to offer as a driver than he showed this year. Giusti meanwhile really impressed, arguably also driving a very mature season, especially for a rookie. Definitely one of the breakout drivers of the year in my book, and a lock for next year's title battle. Trident is officially the new kingmaker team in Formula 3 with yet another title to the Italian team's name. Rafael Camara came in as one of the favourites, but I don't think anybody expected him to just blow the opposition out of the water in the first half, putting it on pole position again and again and managing feature races to perfection really made him look untouchable whenever the Brazilian Ferrari Jr. found himself at the front. But I've spent all year verbally sucking Camara off already. More interestingly, his teammates looked rather bland in comparison and even cost the rocket ship outfit the team's title. Especially returnee Charlie Wirtz disappointed to an unbelievable degree. I think even more than Leon. I know he isn't a world beater, but he has been solid enough throughout his junior career that I thought he might be a bit of a dark horse for the title in a Trident. And instead, he was barely a dark horse for scoring points half the year. 2 podiums near the end of the season unfortunately do not make up for P13 in the fastest machine in the grid. In my book, this sort of year is a career ender, certainly when looking towards F1. Danish Mercedes junior Noah Stromstad was solid in comparison, though still pale compared to his stunning Brazilian teammate. Given his general experience deficit though, I reckon we shouldn't read too much into that one just yet. Campos has transformed into one of the teams to beat across the junior Formula ladder, from F4 to Eurocup 3. The dominance has now reached the FIA stage, with the team's championship going to the Spanish outfit in F3. And yet, I can't help but feel a tiny bit disappointed by its protagonist driver Nikola Tsolov. Don't get me wrong, I am well aware that the Bulgarian Red Bull Junior is a massive talent, there is zero doubt about that. From his karting days to destroying kids in Spanish F4, Tsolov has been nothing short of spectacular for most of his racing career. But still, his third consecutive F3 campaign just wasn't the refined season you'd want to see from a rapid veteran of the category. The speed was there, the execution only on occasion. Of course, that was still enough to beat both of his teammates, even if fellow third-year Mari Boyer made it surprisingly difficult at the end. The recently signed Aston Martin Jr. really has to be one of the big surprises of the year. In my mind, Boyer was always solid, but nothing more. This year, he showed that he can turn solid into a near title assault when given the right tools. I feel like if you could combine him and Zoloff into the same driver, he'd be near unstoppable. Instead, I don't really think Boyer has an incredible skill ceiling we need to get excited about or anything, but F2 could use some more mature drivers as well. And last but not least, Tazinder Puvasek may have been a little outclassed by his two experienced F1 affiliated teammates, but the underrated Thai driver still showed the world what he is capable of with 3 wins in the second half of the season, and may I add, a rather racy look to his entire craft. Definitely just a fun one to watch as well. Considering I often felt like the only person even talking about him in the past, I reckon this was quite the step up. And that was all the 10 teams. I hope I managed to do all of them and all of the drivers at least some justice. It is sometimes easy to forget that all of these 30 plus young racers are very much the main characters in their own career and deserve some recognition aside from being the guys that got beaten by X, Y and Z future F1 driver. But this is where I really want your engagement to complete this review. Who was your biggest surprise and your biggest disappointment of the year? It can be drivers or teams. I've named all of my options over the course of the video, but getting to my ad, I have to say the biggest surprise was Alessandro Giusti with Belinsky and Boyer as the other key contenders. And for the biggest disappointment, I had to pick ART as a squad. Prema's downfall might have been even more shocking, but I can't forgive letting Taponen hanging like that. At least Prema had some questionable drivers in contention for this prestigious award as well. So now it is your time. Go down to the comments and drop your nominations along with all your other thoughts and opinions, and watch this space for an F3 2026 prediction video in the not too distant future. Until then, make sure you're subscribed if you enjoy regular conversation over feeder series, and otherwise I thank you all for watching and I hope to catch you in the next one.